Hi everyone, I'm Brooklyn Bodden, and today I'm going to be talking about the demographic policy and economic growth in China, more specifically, how the one-child policy reshaped China's labor market. So, our agenda today is I'm going to start with an introduction and a brief overview of what I'm going to be speaking out, just get you a bit familiar with China's background, and then move on to the economic theory framework, policy background, and fertility decline, as I'm talking about the one child policy. Then move to demographic and labor effects, economic consequences, followed by policy response and future outlook, and then we will conclude. So, to begin, I'm going to start with the framing the one child policy. So, in this video, I will be explaining how China's one child policy, introduced in 1979, shaped the country's labor force and economy for decades. While it succeeded in slowing population growth, it also created new demographic and economic changes that China still faces today. We'll explore how this policy altered fertility trends, created gender imbalances, and ultimately shifted China's labor supply and economic trajectory. So, moving on, we're going to be talking about population and growth. To understand economic repercussions, let's connect this to the economic theory. In the solo growth model, output or GDP depends on capital, labor, and technology. When the population controls policy, reduces labor growth, this directly constrains potential output. China's one-child policy, by limiting births, essentially traded future labor supply for short-term economic stability. So as you can see on the screen here, I put the solo growth model and continuing on. So now we're going to move on to policy background, more specifically, goals and implementation. The policy was to introduce as an emergency measure to control population after the post-Mao baby boom. Families faced fines or lost jobs if they violated the rule. Through the enforcement varied. Urban and coastal regions adhered more strictly, while rural families often had second children, especially if the first was a girl. Despite these measures, China's population reached 1.26 billion by 2000, exceeding initial targets. So, to go in a little bit more of depth, this shows how they were only allowed to keep one child and they were exceeding measures. So now we're going to move on to decline in fertility and short-term gains. So fertility fell sharply from about 6 children per woman in the 1960s to below 2 by 2015. So as you can see, this is quite a big jump, going from 6 to 2 children in between the years. So this transition created what economists call a demographic divide. A demographic divide with fewer dependent on greater share of the population entered the workforce. Between 1980 and 2010, this boosted China's productivity, industrial output, and savings rates, helping fuel the country's economic miracle. So as you can see, there's a figure on the screen, and I'm going to further explain this figure if you want to start looking at the dates as I bring you through it. So this figure from Barry Naughton's The Chinese Economy shows how China's dependency ratio, a measure of dependent relative to workers, fell dramatically from 1990 to 2015. So if you look on the graph starting at 1990, you can see a great fall. This period marked China's economic sweet spot, a large productive workforce supporting fewer dependents. However, as you can see, if you look to the graph, this ratio is now climbing again as the population ages, signaling future labor shortages. So as you can look at the new one, it's starting to go up again. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about is gender imbalance and labor market distortions. So as I bring you through this, I just wanted to point out that I put a graph on the screen if you want to look at it. And this reported the sex ratio at birth. There's 100 males per 100 females. So one unintended consequence was a severe gender imbalance due to cultural son preference and access to sex selective technology. The sex ratio at birth rose from 119 boys per 100 girls by 2010. This created a generation of missing girls, distorting future household formation, labor participation, and even social stability. Labor shortages are now more pronounced in certain service and care sectors traditionally dominated by women. So, moving forward now, I'm going to be talking about the aging population, more specifically, reversal of the dividend. So, as you can see, I also have a graph here which will show you timelines and with descriptions that I will take you through. So, China's workforce has already peaked. The number of working age citizens began to decline around 2014, while the elderly population will triple by 2050. This shift means fewer workers supporting more retirees, placing pressure on pension systems and health care infrastructure, and slowing GDP growth. The demographic dividend that once propelled China's rise is now reversing. So that moves us on to economic implications for the labor market. So basically, with fewer workers, wages has risen, especially in manufacturing services. This has driven firms to automate or move up the value chain, investing in more robotics, AI, and high technology industries to maintain competitiveness. However, not all sectors can adjust easily, particularly agriculture and elder care, which rely heavily on human labor. So that moves us on to policy response from the one-child to three-child era. So as you can see, this graph, these points ahead, I will bring you through to show the shift. To counteract labor shortages and aging, China abolished the one-child policy in 2015 and later allowed 3 children per family. So this may seem like a little jump, but this is definitely a large jump as you can have 2 more children. So yet birth rates have continued to fall to urban living costs, delayed marriage, and changing family values. Economists call this a low fertility trap, where economic and social structures make recovery difficult even after restrictions are lifted. This point specifically I found very interesting, as the whole thing is interesting because one-child law and three-child law, where most countries like Canada, where we are, you're allowed to have as many children as you want. So this is definitely interesting and different to learn about their economy.